Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fantasy Live's 2024 team preview of the Philadelphia Eagles. Inside, you're going to find three interesting things you need to know. We'll get into the offensive philosophy, what the betting markets think of this squad, the sleeper to target in your drafts, the position battle that most needs monitoring, the beat writers to follow, who we think the Eagles would be if they were a TV or movie character, all that and much more. So give us 30 minutes. We'll get you fully acquainted with your Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm Ian Hartitz, and to help me today is none other than Fantasy Life Director of Analytics and all-around baller, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. And Dwain, we are done with the Cowboys. It is time for the Philadelphia Eagles, second in 2023. But as we've seen over the years, these teams just keep on flipping through as NFC East champions. So going to start things off with the three most interesting things about these 2024 Eagles. And the first one that has been much, just publicly talked about throughout this entire offseason because of a certain music star is the absence of Tush Push buddy Jason Kelce. So Dwain, Jalen Hurts obviously so dependent on the rushing just production here. I mean, it really is ridiculous in terms of just carries from the 1 yard line over these past three seasons. He's first with 28. The next closest is 22. Rushing touchdowns, Jalen Hurts has 22 from the 1 yard line. Next closest is 14. So what is your level of concern both about the effectiveness of the Tush Push without Jason Kelce and whether you think Hurts is going to be getting those same opportunities without Kelce and maybe perhaps due to a shiny new running back in Philadelphia as well?
I mean, it's a small concern, but I mean, they've got a second round pick from 2022, Cam Jurgens. Like, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. Obviously, Jason Kelce was a great player, but the other half of the Tush Push is also freaking Jalen Hurts. And if you look at his lower body, like the dude is just built unlike most other quarterbacks. I mean, he's like a fire hydrant. This guy is completely built to push in touchdowns from down and close. So I think the big question is, do they want to ease the burden on him a little bit and let a guy like Saquon, who we'll talk about more here in a minute, hopefully for where Saquon's going in drafts, he's going to need a few of those touchdowns that DeAndre Swift didn't get last year. But I think that it's probably, I don't want to say it's overblown because it's not like Jalen Hurts is falling down draft boards. He's still coming off the board as the QB2 in most fantasy drafts. But I think when I look at the broader picture, like I love Jalen Hurts, Ian. You know, he's completely surrounded by great weapons that we'll talk about more. But overall, the most sticky thing for quarterbacks year over year in their fantasy production profile is what? It's their rushing ability. It's their ability to earn design rushing attempts, which Jalen Hurts does very much so. 24% of the Eagles' design rushing attempts last year went to Hurts. That's by far number one in the NFL. The next closest was 19% for Lamar Jackson and 49% of the carries inside the 5. Maybe that number, like you mentioned, comes down a little bit, but I still wouldn't be surprised to see him at 30%. And if he does that, he's still probably going to be on track to score 8, 9 rushing touchdowns at worst. And then if you look at his scramble rate, 7%, also well above the NFL average. So the guy just knows how to get it done on the ground. And if there's ever a year, Ian, where suddenly it just all clicks, they throw the ball a little bit more, and he has a huge year in the passing game, and it gets stacked on top of what he's done as a rusher, he could still be one of these, true cheat codes that breaks everything. And then where it's like, well, crap, I didn't have Jalen Hurts. My fantasy team is screwed.
And again, that just goal line rushing usage on top of everything else that he does very well is what has made, Hurts and then also Josh Allen true cheat codes at the position in recent seasons. So you mentioned the rushing usage, Dwain. I mean, Hurts at this point already owns 3 of the top 10 seasons ever in terms of most quarterback rush attempts. And, the supporting cast has made things a lot better. I came up with a metric earlier this offseason, just supporting cast rating, where I took the PFF grades for rushing, receiving, pass blocking, run blocking, everything except the PFF passing grade to try to get an idea of every quarterback's, just supporting cast. And the Eagles over these last 3 seasons, 3rd, 2nd, and 5th, only the 49ers and Ravens have better trailing 5-year marks there. So everything's going great there. And hey, I'm not trying to shit on Hurts as, his own talent. Even as bad as things looked down the stretch of last season, he still finished 7th in both EPA per dropback and completion percentage over expected. So again, Dwain, that's the thing here. Like, if things go right for Hurts, we're talking about the overall QB1 and someone that could score, 4 or 5 fantasy points more than like the QB4 on the season.
Yeah, and in best ball right now, we'll see if this holds for a redraft. This is a dude that commonly now falls into round 4. I'm just like, yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. And you can stack him with A.J. Brown, or you can stack him with Devonta Smith. The days of getting both of them, those are probably gone. Sorry, guys. You should have already done that. You're now going to have to reach to probably try to make that happen. But yeah, I think Jalen Hurts is an absolute cheat code. We love the tight ends and other things going in round 4. But you're going to give me a guy he still has 4,500 passing yard upside. He could throw for 35 passing touchdowns. Am I saying he's going to do that? No, but he's got the weapons around him. You mentioned it, like 75% adjusted completion percent. That's right there with Josh Allen, 77%, 78% for Lamar Jackson, 78% for Patrick Mahomes. Average depth of target right there with those guys. Yards per attempt, he's close. So, I mean, I feel like I get it. They've depended more on the run, so people tend to think that he's less of a passer. And I'm not saying he's Patrick Mahomes or those guys, but I think he's close enough with the receivers that he has that if they decide to throw the ball more, and there's an offensive coordinator change that we'll talk about more here in a minute that might enable that, yes, it could be one of those seasons where Jalen Hurts is just absolutely goes bonkers and is by far above the rest of the pack. Now, we've got other really good quarterbacks, but I mean, he has the kind of talent profile that can enable him to outscore the other quarterbacks by 50 points, which is basically what you're looking for if you're going to take a guy early.
That is all why he is a consensus QB2 right now in pretty much any fantasy ranks you want to look at, only behind Josh Allen. So obviously, though, really big addition to this Eagles offense during the offseason was longtime Giants RB1, Saquon Barkley, now the undisputed RB1 here for your Philadelphia Eagles. $37.75 million with $26 million guaranteed over a 3-year course. I mean, I know all these running backs were complaining not that long ago about, the money they're getting, but it sure seems like a lot of these guys have gone ahead and gotten paid. So good for them. Good for Saquon. Now, is he going to be able to overcome what, let's face it, hasn't been the most fantasy-friendly offense for running backs over the years? I mean, they've tried, okay? It's not like these guys are getting ignored, but I love this stat, Dwayne. Eagles running backs over the past 3 seasons, they're actually first in carries from between the 2 and 5 yard lines. Once they get down the 1 yard line, though, they are 30th. So it was actually funny seeing Barkley on new heights with Jason and Travis Kelce. And Jason straight up told him, he's like, look, man, do not get tackled at the 1 yard line. You know what we're going to do. And he talked about how he would be apologizing to DeAndre Swift about it last year. So I think we'd all agree that's Saquon Barkley, a better talent than DeAndre Swift. Now injuries have, sapped some of that, prime explosiveness that we remember from Saquon over the years. But Dwayne, as much as I think we can, again, look at things like this offensive environment being a bottom 5 group and expected running back PPR points per game over these past few seasons, I can nitpick the goal line usage, but you look at the money, you look at the offensive line, the likely efficiency that's going to come along with it, and you look at the potential for 300 plus touches here. It's tough to slide Barkley too far down the ranks.
Yeah, it's hard. It's also, though, it's kind of tough for me to get super excited about him. Like, I'm giving him 7 rushing touchdowns. Mm-hmm. So I'm still assuming that Jalen Hurts is going to get his. But to your point, that Barkley's going to be better than what we saw last season from DeAndre Swift whenever he does get those opportunities that you talked about that are out between the 2 and the 5 yard line. So I think Barkley's going to be fine. He's just still a difficult click for me in round 2, though, because I do think his scoring could still come down because I don't think he's going to be as involved in the passing game. We already know Jalen Hurts is a scrambler. We've talked about that multiple times. So, I mean, that's fine. But the other problem is you've got this guy named A.J. Brown. He's a badass, man. Devonta Smith is really good in his own right. And then Dallas Goedert might be the most underrated tight end in fantasy this year. We called him overrated last year. Now you guys have gone too far. Now he's underrated. Like, he's a better target than Saquon Barkley. And Barkley has never been an elite pass catching back. He's been more of the check down variety. He's not the kind of guy like a Kamara, a CMC, a Jahmyr Gibbs that's going to work downfield and create all these mismatches that make you the first or second read on a play. He's typically going to be the third read, the check down. Well, guess how often you're getting to your third read when you've got Devonta Smith, AJ Brown, and Dallas Goedert? You're not. And then when you do, Jalen Hurts could just take off and scramble. So I think Saquon Barkley is fine. I think, to your point, he's going to be their lead back. I don't think we have any questions about that. I mean, I think it's his depth chart, but he's going to need to score the touchdowns and he's going to need to come up with big plays. And to be honest, like, he just hasn't been that good over the last couple of seasons. And I wonder if the injuries have just really sapped him. I mean, 13% tackles voided, missed tackles forced per attempt. The NFL average is 17%. So that's a below replacement level back. 2.9 yards after contact. That's NFL average. 11% of his carries have gone for 10 plus yards, slightly better than the NFL average at 9.5%. So maybe still a little bit of explosiveness left there, but that's also the least sticky of those three stats. The two that the running backs typically own is yards after contact and missed tackles forced, and he's not been great in those areas. Now, I'm with you. I think the efficiency he's going to pick up from that offensive line is going to help him some, but I just wonder at what cost, Ian. You're having to take him in the second round. I just rarely find myself clicking on him. I mean, maybe I'm just making a mistake.
Now, I will give him a little bit of slack in 2021, just as he was getting going again. He had that absolute fluke ankle sprain he had to deal with.
I left that out.
And even last year, though, man, like he had a high ankle sprain in week 2, and he came back pretty quick from it, and he kept trying to go through it. So when I see the porous efficiency numbers, I do want to give him credit for trying to play through the pain. But yeah, man, it's not good. I mentioned in the Cowboys preview, Saquon and Zeke were forcing the same amount of missed tackles forced over the past 2 years. I know Giants fans got Devin Singletary as their new running back. Eagles fans, pull up those career numbers and pretty much any rushing efficiency metric you want to look at, and you'll surprisingly see Singletary atop. So I know things like A+ defenders in the box, the offensive lines attached to these players, they matter. But the question becomes is Saquon that much of a better talent to be going, 4 or 5 rounds ahead of guys like maybe Joe Mixon, who has a similar, workload projection also in a good offense. So
he had a 16% target share last year. What do you think that's at this year? I bet it's 10 or 11.
10. Eagles RBs are eighth lowest targets over the last 3 years. Not great. I will say this, though, Dwayne, last question here on Saquon. So when I've been in round 2 of these fantasy drafts, after the top 10 wide receivers are gone, we see Marvin Harrison Jr. and Drake London go off the board. I like the rest of the wide receivers, but that's when we get to the Chris Olaves, the Brandon Ayuks, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins, every single one of those wide receiver 2s. I don't think they're ranked badly necessarily, but they either have a lot of target competition or they're dealing with a less than ideal situation under center. At what point do we just say, hey, it's Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor in round 2. Sign me up for the 300+ touches in my RB1 spot.
When I took CeeDee Lamb at pick 2 and he falls to me at the end of round 2, I guess that's when I would stack the Eagles Cowboys. I've been avoiding him, and again, I think this comes down to your format. If you're playing in a league that has 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs and 1 flex, that changes the dynamics. But we're mostly playing right now. The best ball leagues we're in, you have to start 3 wide receivers plus a flex, and most people are trying to fill their flex with also a wide receiver. So I'm not passing the wide receivers for Barkley just because I can get something else like Barkley later in my fantasy draft. Once those wide receivers are gone, they're gone. And we know that wide receiver is a more talent-driven position than running back. Running back, ultimately, like we say, comes down to the volume. It's nice if you have the efficiency on top. Yes, that's the cherry on top that can make you have just that elite running back one season, like things like we've seen from CMC in the past. But with Barkley, I don't know that he really has that gear left anymore. And so but most of the time I stick with a wide. I think I've drafted 120 teams. I think I've clicked Barkley 1 time.
Wow. That is shocking. I will say, I got caught in that trap a little bit last year where it's like, okay, I can get this archetype later in the draft. Why am I going to waste, an early round pick on it? Doesn't necessarily mean Saquon is mispriced, but yeah, man, it is, wild to see. Again, quite a few red flags. I think people are looking past just a bit there with Saquon. So now for the 2 real, incumbent stars of this, skill position group, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, both now happily paid rich dudes. I know there's, some discontent going on seemingly with AJB in this organization, but he got paid, as did Smith. Life is good. And guess what? Life has been pretty prolific for this duo. Only Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle actually have more receiving yards over these past 2 seasons among any wide receiver duo in the NFL. So it's been great, Dwayne. AJB, wide receiver 8 finishes in each of these past 2 seasons. Devonta, wide receiver 14, wide receiver 20 in PPR points per game. As much as this has been a run-first offense, they've centralized so much of the passing attack around these 2 that they've been able to keep on keeping on. So last year, only the Raiders with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers had a total, combined target share that was greater than the 52% that AJB and Devontae put up. So right now, AJB sitting pretty as the wide receiver 6, finally past Puka Nacua in the early ADP. Devonta down there with a 3rd round wide receiver 19 ADP. Are you just buying? Because I feel like there's not too much of a downside here with other guys.
Yeah, I'm buying, especially AJ Brown. With Devonta Smith, I'm getting some. I'm not getting it all the time. Yeah. Just because we did see a clear distinction between the 2 last year. We had a 30% target share for AJ Brown. Devonta Smith, 24% target share is really good, whenever you play with another dude that has a 30. So, yeah. I mean, we know Devonta Smith is a good player, but like they kind of shy away from him against man coverage. Really interested to get your thoughts here when we talk about the offensive coordinator, what potential that might bring to possibly Devonta Smith, get some more motion, some different things going that we didn't have last year in Philly. Philly did a lot of things right over the last couple of years, but their offense, as far as getting creative and moving guys around and creating mismatches before the snap, they were not good at that. So maybe that's something that could unlock a little bit more for Devonta Smith, but I think they're both priced fine right now. Devonta Smith really looking like, low end wide receiver 2, AJ Brown priced more like a mid-range to low end wide receiver 1.
And again, this has been one of the bigger, revelations in modern NFL. Teams that are constantly using pre-snap shift and motion. Guess what? Makes life a lot tougher on the defense. So last year, only 4 teams used pre-snap shift and motion on at least 70% of their snaps. The Dolphins, the 49ers, the Rams, and the Lions. Dead last by 6% were your Philadelphia Eagles. So conveniently, Dwain, team number 5 there was the Los Angeles Chargers at 68%. And look at this transition. Their offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, is now running this very offense. So again, I cannot, agree enough with kind of the Eagles fans. Just overall, banging your head on the wall sort of, offense this group has had. Yes, you have AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. Those guys can win one-on-one when you ask, but it's not illegal to make life easier for your skill position players at the same time. So talk about, Dwain, some of the pace, the pass-first style that Kellen Moore has had over the years and what this could, do to boost, hopefully, the fantasy value of pretty much everyone involved in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Kellen Moore last year, dropback rate over expected was 5th. He's historically, over the last 5 years, been one of the coaches, typically offensive coordinators, that ranks in the top 5. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these two basically methodologies merge, right? You've had Nick Sirianni, who's really been more, hey, we're going to ground and pound the ball. We want to be more of a balanced offense. But you bring in a coordinator, I believe, to try to challenge you out of that some. So there's other things, with Kellen Moore as well. Like, I mean, they've always been a good play action team. They're still going to do that. If you look last year, Kellen Moore, 20%. That was one of the better marks in the league. Also uses plenty of RPO, something that Jalen Hurts still likes, but teams really caught on to that. So maybe he can bring some new wrinkles there. And then also trick look plays, just giving the defense one more thing to think about before the snap of the ball. 9% of plays for the Chargers, 0% last year for the Eagles. The league average is 7%. So a very uninnovative attack last year. It was basically, we have studs, let's just let them play. So now I think you have the chance that you still have these same studs doing a little bit more scheming to try and help Jalen Hurts out before the snap. I will say I struggled to go too far with it, and I got our own Matthew Friedman. I got him on a call for this, and we went through projections and where we were on everything, and we looked at the Eagles specifically. And I was a little higher than where Friedman was as far as my projections for passing attempts per game and, and their pass rate. Mm-hmm. And so I brought it down a little bit, but I still have it higher than where they've been. So if you look at them, 54% in 2021, 57% drop back rate in 2022, last year 59%, and I've got them at 59% again. But would it surprise me if that was like 61%? Like if you look at Kellen Moore and what he's done historically last year, I mean, he was at his 3-year average is 61%. So it could be closer to 60, 61%, but I think the Eagles do pass the ball a little bit more than what we saw from their last 3-year average.
And you kind of mentioned this earlier, but again, the one big issue here with looking at the Eagles from last year, this year, you say, okay, well, Jason Kelce isn't there anymore. But this actually has been a plan since 2022 when they asked Jason Kelce to help them evaluate the centers before the draft. And, maybe this was, something they like. It always seems like after they make the draft pick, Dwain, that was the plan all along. And this was actually their favorite player. So I understand that could happen. But hey, at least according to the internet, which never lies to us, Kelce did say that Jurgens was his favorite prospect. And accordingly, he was a 51st overall pick off the board. So seems like, Kellen Moore is going to have one of the more talented all-around offenses out there at his disposal. Very, very exciting times in fantasy land. So overall with this team, Dwain, I mean, win total sitting at 10.5, plus 100 over, minus 120 on the under. To win division, they are plus 120 favorites, ever so slightly ahead of the Cowboys, who I believe are resting there at plus 130. So personally, I will be taking over 10.5 wins, and I took under for the Cowboys. So if you can put that together, yes, I do think Philly is going to keep the streak going of there being a different NFC East champion every single season since the 2003-2004 Eagles. Yes, I'm excited about the things on offense. But more than anything, man, I'm just expecting a much bigger turnaround on defense. I mean, this passing defense was horrific by the end of last season and really just throughout the year. Getting defensive coordinator Vic Fangio and using 2 top 40 picks on Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, I think this team gets back to looking like, honestly, one of the best overall rosters in football. So over under 10.5, Dwayne, what say you?
Yeah, I think it's an over as well. As much as I hate to pick that over the Cowboys, and 10.5, that's a tough number to pick the over, but they won 11 games last year. And I'm with you. I think the biggest improvement is the secondary, what you did with the defensive coordinator. I think the offense, as much as we got onto it late last season, I think Kellen Moore will be enough to kind of get that going. But those changes on defense, like last year, had their secondary been better, even with the offensive woes they were having, they still would have been a much better team. So yeah, I'm with you. Give me the over, as tough as it is, on 10.5 wins, and give me them to win the division. Sorry, Cowboys. It's just science. You won last year.
It's you. It's not us, just to be clear on that, Cowboys. Before we go on to a position battle and a sleeper you should be targeting, I want to give a shout out to UFC 303, bringing the action and bringing the octagon back to Vegas. And I can say this, guys, you do not want to miss out on any of the action with our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the UFC. Usually when I see a pay-per-view, I'm hopeful there's going to be 3 fights that, are really piquing my interest. But in this one, man, we don't even want to miss the prelims. I know he's a little bit older at this point, but Cub Swanson on the prelims. Joe Pyfer, I know he got fraud checked a little bit against Hermanson, but, we all saw that, punching thing record until Pereira ended up beating it. And the main card is fantastic too. Ian Gary, MVP, Ortega, Lopez, and obviously that amazing rematch in the main event, Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka. So again, guys, banger of a card, fire matchups, all set to take place in the octagon. And guess what? If you're new to DraftKings, we have a great offer for you. New customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets instantly, only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So again, download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Dwayne, I mentioned it, but a couple more things to discuss here. First of which could be actually very important for us. God forbid, I hope the injury gods let every single NFL player play 17 games of perfect health. Not quite the reality and world we live in, though. So if Saquon Barkley does unfortunately continue to have a bit of problems, playing all 17 games, one of Will Shipley or Kenneth Gainwell is presumably going to, step up and be that RB2. So thoughts on which one of these guys you might want to handcuff. For those that missed it, Boston Scott no longer around to be scoring touchdowns on the Giants each and every time they play.
Yeah, man. Gainwell has done some nice things in the past, but I feel like we've kind of seen his opportunity. There's been some chances for him to take on a larger role. He's not necessarily been able to do so. He's a good receiver out of the backfield, but again, they've got really good weapons. But you could say the same thing about Shipley. In the running back supermodel over at Fantasy Life, Will Shipley was the guy that if you were looking for that dual threat profile coming out of college, now never quite lived up to what they thought he was going to be coming out of high school. That happens to a lot of guys as far as being that true every down threat. He didn't quite live up to it, but he still showed flashes of it, Ian. So I think if you're looking for, a late round stab, or or maybe your dynasty draft or a rookie draft, for some reason hasn't happened yet, you sickos, why haven't you guys gotten it done? He is a guy that I like because I think he profiles that if he does hit, he can hit in such a way. Now, we just talked about it earlier. Like, how much are they going to throw to the running back, even if he is the guy that's out there? It would take multiple things. Like Barkley would have to be out. You probably have to be without one of the wide receivers. But the bottom line is we want guys that have that underlying talent so that when the opportunity arises, they can seize it. So I lean to Shipley, and that's where ADP is at right now. Occasionally, I will mix him in with my very last round pick, especially if I've got something with the Eagles and Cowboys going on in best ball.
Shipley was someone that I know when we were talking before the draft, I was super high on because,
I loved it. Yeah.
Former 5-star, top 100 RAS score. And yeah, you mentioned the receiving ability. Just among the mostly notable, day 1, day 2, and just kind of projected to be sort of running backs. Only Bucky Irving and Ray Davis actually averaged more PPR points per game from receiving than Shipley during his final 2 years in college. So,
and he's a better receiver than either one of those guys.
Yeah. 100%. So again, I would be putting, my money on Shipley. I dabble with him a little bit in round 18 because come on, guys, we can talk us into anybody pretty much with the final pick of the draft. But yeah, Dwayne, I mean, look, if we're just sitting there in week 9, Saquon gets hurt and we don't have definitive, just evidence that they're going to feature Shipley, he's not even really guaranteed to be cracking, our top 20 backs, which usually for handcuff upside, we would like to see. I mean, hell, looking at their depth chart right now, I mean, Tyrion Davis-Price is actually their RB4. You could argue he might be
Kendall
the better.
Nelson.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, TDP could be like the better short down option. We just end up getting this muddled, 3-back committee, which again isn't all that valuable in fantasy because of the way Jalen Hurts plays the position. So maybe not the most valuable handcuff, but again, round 18, you could do worse. Let's talk about one of the stars of the show, though. Someone who you said might just be the single most underrated tight end in all of fantasy football. Dwayne, Dallas Goedert. Why are the people sleeping on him?
I don't know. Because recency bias, people get on things when it's good and they get off things. He didn't do well last year. Now he plays with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. He's clearly the third guy on this offense, but it's a good offense. He still had a 19% target share despite playing with those dudes. So, I mean, that's still really good. And I adjust all these things for games played. Obviously I remove the games where they didn't play. So that's his target share is 19%. Look at his, air yard share per game. All those things are right there in that mid-range to low-end wide tight end 1 range. So, I mean, I think he grades squarely with Evan Ingram, with David Njoku, with Bowers. I mean, Bowers, again, we'll see with Bowers. Like, I think he's a better talent profile than any of the guys we just named, but he might have to battle Michael Myers. So we'll have to see what's going to happen with that. But with Dallas Goedert, it's just one of these deals where now he's going around pick 115. So he goes like a full round after David Njoku and Brock Bowers are off the board, over a round. Like he's a round and a half almost after those players. And I just think that that's wrong. Ian, you talk about hating the ADP, not the player. Well, we can also love the ADP and still think a guy belongs in the same tier. And to me, Dallas Goedert is one of these guys that when I do miss on tight ends and I don't get a Brock Bowers, then I love going after Dallas Goedert.
And honestly, man, I just feel like, unfortunately, injuries have robbed us of the breakout that we've been waiting for ever since they finally traded Zach Ertz to the Cardinals. I mean, sadly, Goddard's been limited to 15, 12, 14 games over these past 3 seasons. Shout out to Injury Predictor. It's a great tool that Draft Sharks offer, and I'm looking at it right now. November 14th of 2021, suffers a concussion. November 14th of next year, shoulder injury. November 5th last year, fractures his forearm. So again, like we've seen him go.
Sit this man down the first 2 weeks of November.
I know, right? Just come on. It's just bad juju at this point. But look, last 2 seasons, he's the 6th ranked tight end PFF receiving grade. He's 8th in yards per out run. We've always known he has the upside. And while he's not going to be the 1B in this offense, he turned 29 last January. That's very much in the range of good fantasy performance at the position. And again, that tight end 12 ADP, not so much, criticizing that. If you want to rank him 12th, that's fine. But yeah, to your point, man, pick 115 when Evan Ingram's going 79, when Jake Ferguson's going 86, David Njoku 102. I do not see that. Goddard, I would say, Dwayne, we can talk about Schultz and Freiermuth, and they'll get their own team previews. But for me, Goddard is the cheapest tight end who I can truly feel good about putting in my tight end 1 slot and figuring out the rest later.
Yeah, and you need some things to go your way for him to suddenly be a breakout tight end and things that we don't want to root for, like A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith missing time. But if they do, and it's the NFL, these things happen, I do think he has the talent to unlock more. For now, look at him as a low-end tight end 1 because he does play with these other really good options. But hey, he's still on a good offense, and he is a talented player, so he's got outs. So I'm with you. I love drafting Dallas Goedert, especially at his current ADP.
Friendly reminder, guys, if you're trying to stay all the way tuned in with all things Philadelphia Eagles throughout the offseason, 3 really great Twitter accounts to help you accomplish that: at 32 Beat Writers, at Coach Speak Index, and at Bo_Wolf, WULF on that one. So appreciate all of you. Dwayne, we're going to end things as we always do with these team previews. If the Eagles were a TV or movie character, who would they be? We'll start with you, my friend.
Yeah, I hate to give this to the Eagles because I'm a Cowboys fan, but one of my favorite sitcoms of all time is Seinfeld. And the reason I love it is every character can hold their own. Seinfeld, honestly, you can make the argument that Seinfeld is the worst character and that George and that Kramer and Elaine are all better. But when I look across the board, that's this offense, like they're loaded. Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback, not great, but maybe he is Seinfeld. He's good,
sure.
not great, but his rushing performance is what makes him elite in fantasy. But then you look at Saquon Barkley, maybe we give him George, and then Kramer. Obviously, my favorite character is AJ Brown because he's an absolute alpha. And then, sorry, Elaine to you, Devonta Smith. But Elaine is awesome, and she dances really badly. So hopefully you don't have any end zone dances. But it's just such a well-balanced offense when everybody's healthy and everybody can do their part. Everybody demands attention. So I think I have to go with Seinfeld because all 4-star players are doing their thing.
I think it works perfectly with the players, but is Nick Sirianni up to that Larry David level? I don't know about that one. So.
No, we'll give him Newman. No, Newman is probably going to be Kellen Moore.
Okay, I think you win this round, Dwayne, but okay, I went ahead and went with Vince from Entourage after Medellin, and this is referencing last year. I mean, a 10-1 start, back-to-back wins over the Cowboys, the Chiefs, and the Bills. It looked like everything was going great because the Eagles didn't even seem like they were playing their best football, yet they were 10-1, and then everything went downhill. It seemed like Vince's rise to stardom was inevitable after everything that went down with Medellin, and then it sucked, and then the Eagles blew their second half. So will they pick themselves up and get back out there and get that, Martin Scorsese movie like Vince ended up doing, or are they going to, turn to the drugged out Vince and end up, punching Eminem in a club and no good things happening from that? Only one way to find out, and that is watching the 2024 season, which we cannot wait for. So let us know in the comments if you have better, TV and movie character comps. Always appreciate all of that. So yeah, guys, that's going to do it for us. As always, you can check out my specific column on the Philadelphia Eagles over at fantasylife.com. Make sure you check out our consensus ranks as well as Dwayne's, again, fantastic projections, all for free. How about that? So links are in the description. Make sure you subscribe and follow Fantasy Life on YouTube as we get you ready for draft season. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in to the Fantasy Life podcast. And until next time, take care, everybody.